Morgan Reeves had mastered the art of going unnoticed. At 29, she navigated through the chaos of Camp Lejeune like a ghost, present but invisible, competent but overlooked. Her modest off-base apartment in Jacksonville, North Carolina reflected this mindset, functional, sparse, and revealing nothing of her extraordinary past. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. No commendations displayed on walls, no shadow boxes of medals, nothing that might prompt questions about who she really was. The supply depot had become her refuge over the past 3 years. Captain Williams had hired her with minimal questions, perhaps recognizing in her eyes the look of someone who carried more experience than her resume suggested. She spent her days processing requisition forms for combat units, managing inventory databases, and fielding complaints about delayed shipments from impatient Marines who had no idea that the quiet woman updating spreadsheets could outshoot, outplan, and outperform most of them under the worst conditions imaginable. "Hey Morgan, we're heading to O'Malley's after shift. You should join us for once," said Lieutenant Cooper, one of the logistics officers who stopped by the depot daily, speaking with the casual confidence of someone who had never faced anything more dangerous than budget meetings. Morgan looked up from her inventory report, her hands steady on the keyboard. "Thanks, but I have plans tonight." The same polite excuse she'd used dozens of times before. Cooper shrugged and left with his colleagues, their voices fading as they discussed which new bartender would be working that evening. Morgan returned to her work, her efficiency allowing her to complete tasks in half the time it took others. She'd learned years ago that being underestimated was often her greatest asset. The door to the supply office swung open again, and Sergeant Major Elena Vasquez walked in. The one person at Camp Lejeune who suspected there was more to Morgan Reeves than her personnel file indicated. Vasquez had served with Force Recon before taking a position as the base's senior enlisted advisor, and she had an uncanny ability to recognize when someone's official story didn't match their capabilities. "Still hiding in this fluorescent cave, Reeves?" Vasquez leaned against the counter, her expression friendly but probing. "When's the last time you actually used your skills instead of just managing other people's equipment?" "Last month," Morgan replied without looking up. "Annual qualification. That doesn't count and you know it," Vasquez said, her tone growing more serious. "Look, I'm leading a night training exercise at the Advanced Tactical Range tomorrow evening. We could use someone with your attention to detail." Morgan's fingers paused briefly over her keyboard before resuming their rhythmic typing. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Come on, when's the last time you were around people who actually understand what you're capable of?" Vasquez pressed. "These admin Marines are good people, but they don't get it. You need to be around your own kind sometimes." The phrase, "your own kind," struck Morgan harder than Vasquez probably intended. She had once been part of something so specialized and covert that even most high-ranking military personnel weren't fully briefed on its existence. Now she was just another veteran, trying to blend into regular military life, carrying skills that felt increasingly wasted with each passing day surrounded by shipping manifests and supply chain logistics. "I'm fine where I am," she said. But the words sounded unconvincing even to her own ears. Vasquez studied her with the intensity of someone trained to evaluate potential threats and assets. "Morgan, I've seen what happens when specialists try to disappear completely. It rarely ends well. You need this, even if you won't admit it." After Vasquez left, Morgan found herself staring at her reflection in her computer screen. She looked ordinary, forgettable, exactly what she'd worked so hard to achieve. But Vasquez's words lingered in her mind, reminding her of who she used to be before certain operations were deemed too politically sensitive to acknowledge. That evening, she stood in her bathroom, rolling up her sleeves as she washed her face. The small, distinctive scar on her right forearm caught the light, a remnant from advanced night operations training that most people would mistake for an ordinary injury. The nearly invisible tattooed serial number next to it told a different story, one contained in classified files and memories she'd learned to suppress so effectively that sometimes she almost believed they belonged to someone else. Morgan had earned that mark through training so demanding that 85% of candidates washed out before completion. She'd operated in conditions that redefined the meaning of impossible, made critical decisions in complete darkness that saved lives and prevented international incidents. She'd been part of something that truly mattered, Then politics intervened, and assets became liabilities overnight. The next morning, Vasquez called at 0600 sharp. "I'm picking you up at 1,900 hours. Wear something suitable for night operations. We're going to the advanced range." Morgan started to object, but something in Vasquez's tone suggested this wasn't actually a request. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. At 1,900 hours precise, Morgan found herself in Vasquez's Jeep, heading toward the isolated training grounds with a mixture of anticipation and dread churning in her stomach. "Just so you know," Vasquez said as they approached the range gates, "there might be some force recon and scout snipers out there tonight. Try not to show them up too badly." Morgan almost smiled. If only Vasquez knew that showing up was the last thing on her mind. All she wanted was to observe from the shadows, to remain unnoticed as she had successfully done for the past 3 years. She had no idea that within a few hours, that carefully constructed anonymity would shatter completely, exposing truths that certain people had gone to great lengths to keep buried. As they drove through the security checkpoint, Morgan felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with returning to a world she'd once thrived in. The distant pop of gunfire from the conventional ranges, the low hum of generators powering tactical equipment, the silhouettes of Marines moving with purpose through the gathering darkness, it all reminded her of what she'd lost and could never reclaim. "You okay?" Vasquez asked, noticing her tension. "I'm fine," Morgan lied, adjusting her sleeve to ensure the small scar and tattooed serial number remained hidden. Some secrets were better left undiscovered, and some specialists were safer when they remained in the shadows. The advanced tactical range at Camp Lejeune was alive, with the controlled intensity of elite training. Scout snipers and force recon Marines moved with deliberate precision, their faces painted with camouflage, their movements disciplined and measured. Their voices carried across the firing positions, confident, focused, and completely at home in the challenging environment. Morgan followed Vasquez to the observation area, a raised platform that offered a clear view of the range without interfering with the training exercises. She wore simple dark cargo pants and a navy blue long-sleeve shirt, her auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun. To anyone watching, she looked exactly like what she was supposed to be, a supply officer with a casual interest in tactical operations. "Check out this setup," Vasquez said, gesturing toward the sophisticated night vision testing stations and infrared target systems. "Makes the regular qualification range look like a carnival shooting gallery, doesn't it?" Morgan nodded, but her attention was focused on the Marines below. She observed their movements, noted their breathing patterns, watched how they handled their weapons in the fading light. Most were highly competent by standard military metrics, but she could identify dozens of small inefficiencies, minor flaws that might not matter on a training range but could prove fatal in actual combat conditions. "Look who Vasquez brought to the party," called one of the Force Recon Marines to his team, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "Supply office must be having a field trip tonight." Another Marine glanced up at the observation deck, his eyes settling on Morgan with the dismissive evaluation of a combat specialist judging support personnel. "Hope she brought extra batteries for the night vision. Gonna need all the help they can get." The comment wasn't directed at her specifically, but Morgan felt the familiar sting of assumption. Throughout her military career, she'd encountered this particular brand of arrogance, the confidence of those who judged capabilities based on current assignments rather than actual experience. She'd learned to let such comments slide off without response, but something about being back in this environment made the dismissal feel sharper than usual. "Mind if we get closer to the action?" Vasquez asked the range officer, a lieutenant who looked like he took his job very seriously. "Support personnel need to stay in the observation area," the lieutenant replied with practiced authority. "Can't have untrained individuals anywhere near the night fire exercises." Morgan bit back a response that would have revealed far more than she was comfortable sharing. Instead, she watched as the Marines continued their preparations, their movements becoming more casual as they assumed their audience was suitably impressed by their basic tactical proficiency. $50 says none of these admin types could hit anything in low light, one of the younger Force Recon Marines said during a break between drills. His team leader, a staff sergeant who carried himself with the weight of actual combat experience, glanced toward the observation deck. Supply officers probably think night vision is what happens when you turn off the lights in the warehouse, another added, prompting laughter from the group. The conversation continued with the casual mockery that often develops between combat and support units. Morgan had heard variations of this throughout her career, from trainers who believed women had no place in special operations to foreign operatives who had underestimated her until it was too late. "You know what gets me?" said a female scout sniper with the confident authority of someone who had earned her position through exceptional skill. "These support personnel who think watching us train somehow gives them insight into what we actually do. Like watching surgical videos makes you a brain surgeon." The group laughed, their voices carrying across the range with casual disregard. They saw exactly what Morgan wanted them to see. A quiet supply officer who had probably never faced anything more challenging than an inventory discrepancy. But as the evening progressed and true darkness fell, Morgan found herself studying the night operations equipment with professional interest. The night vision devices were top of the line, the infrared targeting systems appropriately calibrated, the darkness adaptation protocols adequate if somewhat outdated. Her fingers itched with muscle memory, recalling the weight of specialized equipment and the precision that had once defined her existence. "I can see you're interested," Vasquez observed quietly. "Want me to ask if they'll let you try a few shots?" "That's not a good idea," Morgan replied, but her eyes remained fixed on an unattended advanced night vision rifle scope that sat on the equipment table like a silent challenge. Vasquez followed her gaze and smiled. "Come on, Reeves. When's the last time you handled something besides requisition forms? You miss it. I can tell." The truth was, she did miss it. Not the politics or the bureaucracy or the impossible decisions that had ultimately derailed her career, but the pure technical challenge of performing at the highest level under the most difficult conditions. The way specialized equipment felt like an extension of her own senses. The moment of perfect clarity before executing a maneuver that most people would consider impossible. "Besides," Vasquez continued, "what's the worst that could happen? You embarrass yourself in front of a bunch of specialists who already think supply officers can't shoot?" Morgan considered the question seriously. The worst that could happen was recognition. Someone noticing that her proficiency with night operations equipment exceeded normal parameters by several orders of magnitude. Someone asking questions about training that officially didn't exist. Someone looking too closely at the small scar and serial number she kept hidden beneath her sleeve. But as she watched the Marines continue their exercises with the casual competence of those who considered themselves elite, she felt something stirring that she'd tried to bury for 3 years. Not pride. She'd learned that pride was a luxury professionals couldn't afford. Purpose. The knowledge that her skills, her experience, her hard-won expertise might still have value beyond processing supply requests. "Just one round," she said finally, surprising herself with the decision. "Nothing fancy." Vasquez grinned like she'd just won a bet with herself. "Now you're talking. Let me go charm the range officer." As Vasquez walked away to negotiate access to the firing line, Morgan rolled down her sleeves, ensuring the scar remained covered. The distinctive mark was a remnant of her time, with a unit so classified that its operations were known only by code names and outcome reports, never by the specialists who executed them. She had no way of knowing that across the range, Colonel James Blackwood was conducting an unexpected inspection of the night training facilities with several visiting foreign military advisors. She had no way of knowing that within minutes, her carefully constructed anonymity would be completely exposed. All she knew was that after 3 years of managing other people's equipment, she was about to handle specialized gear again, and that some skills, once learned, could never be forgotten. 5 minutes, the range officer said with obvious reluctance after Vasquez worked her persuasive magic. "And stay with the basic course of fire. This isn't show and tell for the support staff." Morgan walked toward the firing line with measured steps, her movements neither rushed nor hesitant. The advanced night vision scope sat on the equipment table exactly where she'd observed it earlier, freshly calibrated and properly maintained. As her fingers closed around the familiar technology, muscle memory awakened like a dormant program suddenly receiving power. "Check this out," one of the Force Recon Marines muttered to his team. "Supply lady wants to play with the big toys." Morgan ignored the comment, focusing instead on the equipment in her hands. She inspected the night vision device, with movements that were too smooth, too automatic for someone who supposedly only processed equipment requests. The scope felt right, balanced, responsive, and perfectly aligned for the challenge ahead. For the first time in 3 years, she was handling tools designed specifically for her unique skill set. She selected a target positioned 300 meters downrange in complete darkness, significantly further than most of the Marines had been attempting. No practice shots, no equipment adjustments, just a calm breathing pattern that had served her through specialized training and covert operations in environments where one mistake meant mission failure, or worse. 300 meters in zero light? The female scout sniper who'd mocked support personnel earlier laughed. Someone's feeling ambitious. Morgan mounted the scope on the designated rifle, adjusted her stance with microscopic precision, and took aim. The world narrowed to the space between her position and a distant target visible only through advanced technology. Breathing controlled, heartbeat steady, everything else falling away until nothing existed except the mechanics of perfect execution. 3 shots in rapid succession. The sound was crisp, controlled, each round fired with technical precision that spoke of thousands of hours of specialized training and years of experience that couldn't be simulated or forgotten. When she finished, Morgan lowered the weapon and placed it carefully back on the table. She said nothing, made no dramatic gestures, offered no explanations. She'd learned long ago that exceptional performance required no commentary. At the distant target, now illuminated for verification, 3 bullet holes formed a perfect triangle in the center mass, a grouping tight enough to cover with a playing card, achieved in complete darkness at a distance that exceeded standard qualifications by a considerable margin. The Marines who had been watching fell silent. Even their instructors stopped mid-sentence, staring downrange at marksmanship that defied easy explanation. This wasn't luck or beginner's fortune. This was the kind of precision that required training most of them had never encountered. Holy, one of the younger Marines breathed, then caught himself before finishing the exclamation. Probably just got lucky, another muttered, but his voice carried uncertainty rather than conviction. Morgan began clearing the weapon with the same methodical precision she'd used to fire it, her movements efficient and practiced. As she worked, the range lights suddenly activated for target verification, causing her to instinctively push up her sleeve for better dexterity in the unexpected brightness. That's when everything changed. The fabric shifted just enough to reveal something that transformed the entire situation. A small, distinctive scar on her right forearm with an almost invisible tattooed serial number next to it. Marks that only came from one program, a program so classified that most military personnel thought it was merely a rumor.
Colonel James Blackwood had been walking through the range with the visiting military advisors when he witnessed the impossible shooting display. He'd planned to compliment whoever had demonstrated such exceptional night marksmanship, perhaps use it as an example of American military proficiency. That's when he spotted the scar and serial number, and everything he thought he knew about the quiet supply officer collapsed. Blackwood had been with military intelligence for 20 years. He'd worked with some of the most specialized units in the American Armed Forces, had seen capabilities that most people couldn't imagine. But the marking on Morgan's arm wasn't just any training scar. It was the distinctive identifier of Program Artemis, the military's ultra-classified night operations specialist unit. Blackwood knew that combination. He'd seen the after-action reports in the kind of briefings that happened in SCIFs, with no recording devices allowed. Reports about a female operative with the designation Phantom, who had completed missions that existed only in the most classified files. Someone who had redefined the parameters of what was possible in zero-light operations. Someone who had disappeared from active duty after an incident that raised serious questions at the highest levels of command. "My God," Blackwood whispered, barely audible. "It's really you." The Marines who'd been mocking Morgan had gone quiet, sensing that something significant was happening, but lacking the context to understand what they were witnessing. Morgan looked up, meeting Blackwood's eyes with the steady gaze of someone who had operated in conditions that would render most people helpless. She didn't confirm or deny his recognition. She didn't need to. The shooting, the way she'd handled the equipment, the scar and serial number that documented service in a program that recruited from the top 0.1% of Special Operations Forces, it all told a story that required no verbal confirmation. "Colonel?" one of the Force Recon instructors asked, confused by the sudden tension. Blackwood stepped closer, his voice dropping to the formal tone reserved for situations that required extreme discretion. "Ms. Reeves, I need to speak with you privately. Immediately." Morgan nodded once, placing the night vision equipment down with the same careful precision she'd demonstrated throughout the encounter. Around them, the Marines had stopped their training exercises entirely, sensing that something significant was unfolding but lacking the clearance level to understand its implications. "Name and last assignment?" Blackwood asked quietly once they were out of earshot. "Morgan Reeves. Program Artemis. Deactivated 3 years ago." The words hung in the air like live ammunition. Blackwood's face cycled through several expressions as he processed what he'd just heard. Program Artemis wasn't just another unit. It was the military's ghost program, the team that handled operations requiring capabilities that most military planners considered impossible, particularly in zero-light environments where even night vision technology had limitations. "Artemis," Blackwood repeated slowly. "Your Phantom." Morgan's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. "Recognition, perhaps resignation. That designation was retired with my service," she said quietly. The young Marines who had been mocking her just minutes before now stood in awkward silence, finally understanding that they'd been insulting someone whose operational record likely exceeded their collective experience. The female scout sniper who'd called her a wannabe had gone pale, as if suddenly realizing she'd been dismissing her own professional ancestor. "Operation Blackout," Blackwood said carefully, testing whether she would acknowledge details that existed only in the most classified briefings. "Never happened," Morgan replied with a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes. 8 critical assets extracted from a facility that intelligence said was impossible to penetrate in zero-light conditions. Turns out, intelligence had incomplete information about several key factors. Blackwood nodded slowly, pieces of a puzzle he'd never expected to solve falling into place. He was looking at a living legend, someone whose code name appeared in classified reports that would remain sealed for decades. Someone who had earned her place in Program Artemis through selection processes that eliminated candidates at a rate that made even Special Forces training seem inclusive. And for the past 3 years, she'd been invisible, processing supply requests for Marines who had no idea what real specialized operations entailed. The revelation changed everything. The mockery stopped. The assumptions crumbled. Suddenly everyone on that firing range understood they were in the presence of someone extraordinary, someone who had chosen to hide in plain sight rather than leverage past achievements. Morgan had come to the range hoping to remain unnoticed. Instead, she had inadvertently reminded everyone present that legends don't always announce themselves with fanfare. Sometimes they reveal themselves with a perfect shot grouping in complete darkness and a small scar that tells a story most people could never comprehend. The silence stretched across the firing range like a held breath. Blackwood studied Morgan's face with the intensity of someone trying to reconcile legend with reality, while the Marines who had been mocking her just minutes before struggled to process their complete misreading of the situation. "Ms. Reeves," Blackwood said, his voice carrying the formal respect reserved for individuals with distinguished service records. "Would you be willing to share some of your expertise with our personnel? We have specialized training requirements that could benefit from your unique perspective." Morgan considered the offer carefully. For 3 years, she'd avoided anything that might draw attention to her past. She'd learned to be invisible, to let people underestimate her, to accept their assumptions rather than correct their misconceptions. But looking at the faces around her, young Marines who had gone from mockery to respect in the space of a few minutes, she realized that some knowledge was too valuable to keep hidden. "What did you have in mind?" she asked. "Advanced night operations, zero-light navigation, sensory adaptation techniques, the kind of specialized skills that can't be effectively taught from manuals or simulations." The female scout sniper, who had dismissed her earlier, stepped forward hesitantly. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. I had no idea." "You saw exactly what I wanted you to see," Morgan interrupted, not unkindly. "Don't apologize for drawing reasonable conclusions based on limited information. That's actually good tactical thinking." The young woman looked uncertain, as if she couldn't decide whether she was being complimented or corrected. Morgan understood the confusion. She'd spent her entire specialized career navigating the space between perception and reality, between what people assumed about her capabilities and what she could actually accomplish. "However," Morgan continued, "this is also a lesson about assumptions. In operational environments, the person who doesn't look threatening is often the most dangerous. The seemingly insignificant detail might be the critical intelligence. The individual who appears ordinary might possess extraordinary capabilities." Blackwood nodded approvingly. "Exactly the kind of perspective our personnel need to hear." Word of the incident spread through Camp Lejeune with the speed that only military communications could achieve. By the next morning, every Marine, sailor, and officer on the base had heard some version of the story. The details varied with each telling. Some said she'd hit targets that weren't even visible. Others claimed she could see in complete darkness without equipment. But the core truth remained constant. Phantom of Program Artemis had been hiding among them, invisible and unrecognized until a moment of casual mockery had revealed her true identity. Morgan found herself the center of attention in a way that made her deeply uncomfortable. Officers appeared at the supply depot throughout the day, making transparent excuses to verify requisition orders. Senior enlisted personnel found reasons to walk past her office, hoping to catch a glimpse of the specialist they'd heard about through the base grapevine. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" Vasquez asked as they sat in the base cafeteria that evening. "Recognition for what you've accomplished?" Morgan shook her head. Recognition was never the objective. The mission was the objective. The team was the objective. Everything else was just documentation. But even as she said it, she had to admit there was something satisfying about seeing those young Marines approach their training with newfound seriousness that afternoon. The casual arrogance had been replaced by focused attention. The dismissive comments replaced by thoughtful questions. "Ma'am," one of the Marines had asked during an impromptu session after the revelation, "how do you maintain spatial awareness in zero-light conditions?" "Training until your other senses compensate automatically," she replied. "But more importantly, accepting that fear of darkness is natural. Fear keeps you alert. Panic makes you helpless. The difference is preparation."
It was the kind of honest conversation about specialized operations that these Marines had probably never experienced. Most military training focused on technology and procedures, but Morgan spoke about the psychological realities that no manual could adequately capture. As she drove back to her apartment that night, Morgan found herself thinking about the small scar on her forearm, not just the mark itself, but what it represented. For 3 years, she treated it like evidence of a past life, something to be hidden and forgotten. Today it had served as documentation that her experience and expertise still had value beyond processing supply forms. "You know," Vasquez said, breaking the comfortable silence as they walked to the parking lot, "there are probably dozens of units that could benefit from what you just offered those Marines today." "I'm not interested in becoming a traveling instructor," Morgan replied, but her tone lacked conviction. "I'm not talking about traveling, I'm talking about teaching, really teaching. Not just managing inventory at the supply depot, but passing on knowledge that could save lives in specialized operations." The suggestion lingered between them as Morgan drove through the evening traffic. She had spent 3 years trying to disappear, to become invisible, to let the world forget that someone with her specific capabilities had ever existed. But today had reminded her that some skills were too valuable to waste, some experiences too important to bury. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Ms. Reeves, this is Colonel Blackwood. Would you be available to discuss a more formal arrangement? The Marines you worked with today showed more improvement in one evening than we typically see in weeks of conventional training. We could use someone with your expertise on a regular basis." Morgan stared at the message, weighing the implications. Accepting would mean stepping back into a world she'd tried to leave behind. Accepting visibility she'd spent years avoiding. But it would also mean that her knowledge, hard-won through selection processes that had eliminated most candidates, could serve something larger than herself again. She thought about the young Marines who'd started the day mocking what they didn't understand and ended it asking serious questions about specialized operations. She thought about the skills she'd learned in facilities that didn't appear on any official map, techniques that had been tested in situations where failure meant mission compromise. Most importantly, she thought about the teammates who hadn't made it back, people who had trusted her capabilities in environments where most operators would be effectively blind, who'd relied on her expertise to complete missions that officially never happened. What would they think about her hiding in a supply depot, processing equipment requests, while the next generation of specialists learned from instructors who had never operated in truly zero-light conditions? "What are you thinking?" Vasquez asked, noticing her contemplation as they parted ways in the parking lot. Morgan looked at her reflection in her car window, seeing not the invisible supply officer she had tried to become, but the specialized operator she had never really stopped being. The small scar on her arm might be faded, but the knowledge it represented was as sharp as ever. "I'm thinking," she said slowly, "that maybe some capabilities are too important to keep hidden. Her fingers traced the outline of the scar through her sleeve, remembering not just what she had lost, but what she still had to offer. Phantom was about to step back into the light, or more accurately, back into the darkness where her true skills could shine. 3 weeks after the incident at the Advanced Tactical Range, Morgan Reeves found herself in an office she'd never expected to visit again. Naval Special Warfare Command Headquarters, sitting across from Colonel James Blackwood and Captain Natalie Chen, the base's specialized training director. The walls were lined with unit photographs and classified mission commendations, a formal military environment that Morgan had once navigated with natural ease. "Ms. Reeves," Captain Chen began, her tone professional but respectful. "Colonel Blackwood has briefed me on your background as well as the impromptu training session you conducted with our Marines. I'm authorized to offer you a position as Civilian Special Operations Instructor with security clearance appropriate to your previous service record." Morgan had anticipated this conversation, but hearing the formal offer still caught her slightly off guard. For 3 years, she'd convinced herself that her specialized career was permanently closed, that her expertise in zero-light operations was no longer needed or wanted. Now she was being invited back into the world she'd been forced to abandon. What would the position entail? Quote, she asked, maintaining the calm demeanor that had served her through countless high-pressure situations. "Advanced night operations training, zero-light navigation, sensory adaptation techniques," Blackwood explained. "Essentially sharing real-world experience that our standard curriculum can't provide. You'd work with small groups of specially selected personnel. Focus on practical application rather than theoretical approaches." "And the security requirements?" Morgan asked, already knowing the answer. Captain Chen leaned forward slightly. "Your previous clearance would be reinstated with appropriate updates. Some of what you'd be teaching touches on classified techniques, methods that can't be shared through conventional channels." Morgan understood the implications. They weren't just offering her a job. They were offering her a way back into the specialized communities she'd lost, the professional family that politics and optics had forced her to leave behind. "Can I ask why now?" Morgan said. "My deactivation wasn't exactly amicable." The two officers exchanged measured glances. Captain Chen spoke carefully. "Let's just say that certain decisions made 3 years ago are being reassessed. The strategic environment that led to your deactivation has evolved. Your expertise is more relevant now than it was then." It was as close to an admission of wrongdoing as Morgan was likely to get from official channels. The system that had sidelined her after an operation that saved lives but created political complications was now quietly acknowledging they had made a mistake. "I'll need to think about it," Morgan said. "Of course, take whatever time you need," Blackwood replied. "But I hope you'll consider the impact you could have. The Marines you worked with 3 weeks ago are still talking about what they learned in that brief session. That kind of knowledge transfer is invaluable." As Morgan drove away from the headquarters building, she found herself taking a detour past the supply depot where she'd spent 3 years in comfortable anonymity. Captain Williams, who'd given her a job without asking too many questions, deserved better than her simply disappearing without explanation. Williams was reviewing inventory reports when she walked in, his weathered hands moving efficiently through digital forms with the patience of someone who had been managing military logistics longer than most officers had been in service. "You caused quite a stir at the night range," he said without looking up. "Word travels fast on base, especially when it involves one of our own, revealing extraordinary capabilities." Morgan shouldn't have been surprised that he'd heard. In a military community like Camp Lejeune, news of a supply officer outperforming Force Recon Marines in their own specialty would spread rapidly. "I didn't intend for it to become a spectacle," she said. "Didn't intend for it to happen at all, I'd guess," Williams replied, finally looking up with eyes that held more understanding than she'd given him credit for. "But sometimes the mission finds the operator, not the other way around." "They offered me a training position." Williams nodded slowly. "Figured they might. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to stay here. Keep things simple. But another part remembers why you developed those skills in the first place," Williams finished for her. "Let me ask you something, Morgan. In all the time you've worked here, processing requisition forms and managing inventory, have you ever felt like you were making a real difference?" The question hit harder than she'd expected. The truth was, she'd found satisfaction in the work. The organization required, the problem-solving, the efficiency. But making a difference? That was harder to claim. Those Marines you trained, Williams continued, they might end up in situations where what you taught them means the difference between mission success and failure. Can you say the same about processing equipment requests? Morgan had to admit he had a point. The specialized skills she'd developed through training that eliminated most candidates were too valuable to waste on routine administrative tasks. But accepting the position would mean giving up the anonymity she'd worked so hard to achieve.
What if I fail?
She asked. What if I'm not as effective at teaching as I was at executing? Williams smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious features. Morgan, in 3 years of watching you work, I've never seen you fail at anything you commit to. The only failure would be not trying. That evening, Morgan sat in her apartment, staring at the business card Captain Chen had given her. The decision felt monumental, not just about accepting a job, but about reclaiming an identity she'd been forced to abandon. Her phone rang. Vasquez. So, she said without preamble, heard you met with the brass today. Are you going to take it? News really does travel fast around here. That's not an answer. Morgan walked to her bathroom mirror, rolling up her sleeve to look at the small scar and tattooed serial number on her forearm. The program Artemis identifier looked back at her, a permanent reminder of sacrifice and exceptional service. Vasquez, she said finally, what do you think those Marines I worked with are going to remember in 5 years? The techniques I showed them, or the fact that someone they'd dismissed as just a supply officer turned out to be someone with specialized capabilities beyond their experience? Probably both. Why? Because maybe the most important lesson isn't about night operations or zero-light navigation. Maybe it's about not underestimating people based on their current assignment. About respecting specialized knowledge even when it doesn't announce itself with rank or position. She could hear Vasquez smiling through the phone. Sounds like you've made your decision. Morgan looked at her reflection one more time. Not the invisible supply officer she had tried to become, but the specialized operator she had never really stopped being. The small scar on her arm might be faded, but the capabilities it represented were as sharp as ever. Yeah, she said, reaching for Captain Chen's business card. I think I have. Some specialists were meant to remain in the shadows, serving one mission at a time. But some knowledge was too valuable to keep hidden, and some people were too skilled to waste their talents on comfortable anonymity. Morgan Reeves was about to stop being invisible and start being truly useful again. 6 months into her new position as civilian special operations instructor at Camp Lejeune, Morgan had settled into a routine that felt both familiar and strange. Her days were structured around small group training sessions, each carefully designed to bridge the gap between standard military night operations and the specialized capabilities she had once employed in the field. The training facility she'd been assigned was state-of-the-art but Spartan. Specialized equipment locked in secure cabinets, environments that could be manipulated for various light conditions, and a reinforced door with biometric access that reflected the classified nature of her curriculum. Most importantly, it had observation windows overlooking the advanced tactical range where her true identity had been accidentally revealed. Today we're discussing threat detection in zero-light environments, Morgan told her current group of 6 Marines, all specially selected volunteers who had specifically requested her advanced training program. Who can tell me the 3 most common mistakes operators make when standard night vision technology fails? The responses came quickly. These Marines had learned to think critically about specialized scenarios rather than simply following standard procedures. That evolution in their approach was one of Morgan's greatest achievements as an instructor. Over-reliance on technological solutions, failure to utilize non-visual sensory input, and movement patterns that assume visual confirmation, answered Corporal Martinez, a promising specialist who reminded Morgan of herself at that age. Excellent, Morgan nodded. Now let's talk about why those mistakes compromise missions and endanger teams. Morgan had discovered that she genuinely enjoyed teaching, not just the technical aspects of night operations, but the critical thinking that separated standard operators from exceptional specialists. Her students absorbed every word, not because of her legendary status, but because they understood that her lessons had been tested in situations where standard approaches failed, and improvisation meant survival. After class, she found Colonel Blackwood waiting in her office, his expression unusually serious. "We have a situation," he said without preamble. Joint Special Operations Command is requesting consultation on a developing crisis. They specifically ask for someone with your background and current instructional expertise. Morgan felt the familiar focus that came with high-stakes operations. What kind of consultation? Extraction scenario. Critical intelligence assets trapped in a facility with compromised power systems. Zero light conditions. Minimal support options. High-value targets that cannot be abandoned. Sound familiar? It did sound familiar. Uncomfortably so. The last time she dealt with a situation like this, it had ended her specialized career and forced her into 3 years of anonymity. "James," she said, using his first name for the first time since they'd established their professional relationship. "I'm not an operator anymore. I'm an instructor." "There's a significant difference." "They don't want you to execute," he replied quickly. "They want your assessment of the tactical challenges and your input on preparing the team that will. Your experience with similar operations makes you uniquely qualified to advise them on what they're facing." Morgan studied his face, reading the subtext beneath his words. "This isn't just about tactical consultation, is it?" Blackwood sighed. "The team assigned to this mission is skilled, Morgan. Very skilled. But they've never faced anything like what you dealt with in Operation Blackout. JSOC recognizes that your training methods have produced exceptional results here at Lejeune. They want that same level of preparation for this extraction. And if I refuse, then a team of highly trained operators attempts a mission with a significantly lower probability of success than necessary." The weight of that responsibility settled on Morgan's shoulders like familiar equipment. She'd spent 3 years trying to escape the burden of making decisions that affected other people's lives. But here it was again. The knowledge that her expertise could mean the difference between success and tragedy. When do they need an answer? The briefing is tomorrow morning. If you agree to consult, you'd need to be at JSOC headquarters by evening. Morgan looked out her office window at the tactical range where Marines were conducting their afternoon training. She'd built something meaningful here, a program that was producing better prepared specialists, a reputation based on teaching rather than legendary exploits. Accepting this consultation would mean stepping back into the world of classified operations and impossible decisions. But it would also mean that her knowledge, her experience, her hard-won expertise could serve something larger than classroom instruction. "I'll need to review the intelligence files tonight," she said finally. Blackwood's expression showed relief mixed with concern. "Morgan, you should know. There are people at JSOC who never agreed with your deactivation. This could be the beginning of a restoration of your official record." "I'm not interested in restoration," Morgan replied. "I'm interested in making sure those operators come home alive." That evening, Morgan sat in her apartment reviewing classified documents that brought back memories she'd tried to suppress. Satellite photos of compounds, intelligence assessments, tactical challenges that seemed insurmountable until you actually confronted them and learned that impossible was often just another way of saying unprecedented. Her phone buzzed with a text from Vasquez. "Heard through the grapevine that you're heading to JSOC. Proud of you." "Not sure this is something to be proud of yet," she replied. "It is. You're using your specialized knowledge to help people again. That's always something to be proud of." Morgan looked at the files spread across her kitchen table. Plans and assessments and intelligence reports that would determine whether a team of operators succeeded or failed in their mission. The responsibility was enormous, but for the first time in 3 years, it felt right. She picked up her phone and called Blackwood. "I'll take the consultation, but I have conditions." "Name them." "I want complete access to the team's operational records. I want input on their preparation timeline, and I want to be involved in the pre-mission briefing." "Done. Anything else?" Morgan looked at the small scar on her forearm, remembering not just what she'd lost, but what she'd learned from losing it. "If this goes wrong, if politics interferes with operational necessity again, I want assurance that the accountability falls on the decision-makers, not on the operators executing the mission." "You have my word on that." After ending the call, Morgan began packing for the trip to JSOC headquarters. She selected professional attire that would command respect in high-level briefing rooms, but also included the simple navy blue shirt she'd worn to the night range 6 months ago, a reminder that specialists didn't always announce themselves with insignia or titles. As she prepared for bed, she found herself thinking about the Marines she'd been training. They'd learned not just tactical skills, but critical thinking. They developed not just technical competence, but the kind of confidence that came from being taught by someone who had proven these techniques in actual operations. Tomorrow she'd be using that same knowledge to prepare a different team for a mission that would test everything she taught them. The stakes were higher than any training exercise, but the principles remained the same. Preparation, precision, and the understanding that success often depended on making the right decision when standard approaches failed. Morgan Reeves was no longer hiding behind comfortable anonymity. She was stepping back into the arena where her expertise had real consequences, where her knowledge could mean the difference between mission success and failure. Phantom was fully operational again. The JSOC briefing room was exactly as Morgan remembered: secure, austere, and filled with people whose decisions carried strategic consequences. She sat at a reinforced conference table surrounded by officials whose ranks and clearances exceeded what most military personnel would ever know existed. But after 6 months of teaching specialists who respected her expertise, she felt more confident in these corridors of power than she had 3 years ago. "Ms. Reeves," said General Robert Hayes, a man whose reputation for operational brilliance was matched only by his intolerance for bureaucratic interference, "thank you for joining us on short notice. Your insights on Operation Blackout have proven invaluable in planning this extraction." Morgan nodded professionally. "General, I've reviewed the intelligence package. The tactical challenges are significant, but not insurmountable, provided the team is properly prepared." The digital displays on the wall showed a facility in a remote region that bore uncomfortable similarities to her last classified operation: complex structure, minimal access points, high-value assets, and most critically, compromised power systems that would create zero-light conditions throughout the target area. "The team assigned to this mission," General Hayes continued, "consists of 6 operators from Delta Force, all extensively experienced, all volunteers, but none with specialized training in the kind of zero-light conditions this operation will involve." Morgan studied the personnel files she'd been given. Each operator was exceptionally qualified with impressive service records and commendable operational experience. But reading about combat proficiency was different from having executed missions in environments where standard night vision technology was insufficient. "General, with respect, standard qualifications don't prepare operators for the sensory challenges of true zero-light operations," Morgan stated. "These individuals will be operating in an environment where visual confirmation is minimal to non-existent, where spatial awareness must come from other sensory inputs, where the margin for error approaches zero. Which is precisely why we're requesting your input on their final preparation phase," said Major Sarah Daniels, the mission planner. "You have 10 days to enhance their readiness for challenges they've never faced. 10 days to compress years of specialized experience into intensive training." Morgan had accomplished difficult tasks before, but this felt like trying to teach someone to navigate a mountain in a blizzard by describing snow. "I'll need complete authority over their training regimen," she said. "No interference from standard protocols. No limitations on methods or intensity." General Hayes raised an eyebrow. "That's an unusual request. This is an unusual mission. These operators need to understand not just what to do, but how to think when standard approaches fail. Conventional training methods won't accomplish that in 10 days. The room fell silent as the assembled officials considered her demand. Morgan understood the risk she was taking, asking for authority that exceeded normal channels, demanding trust that her reputation might not fully justify. "Approved," General Hayes said finally, "but understand, Ms. Reeves, if this mission fails because of inadequate preparation, the responsibility falls on everyone in this room." "Understood, General, but if it succeeds because these operators were properly prepared for what they're facing, that credit belongs to them." 3 days later, Morgan found herself at a classified training facility in North Carolina facing 6 Delta Force operators who represented some of the most elite warriors in the American military. They stood at ease in casual formation, their bearing reflecting years of operational experience and the quiet confidence of proven professionals. "Gentlemen," Morgan began, "everything you think you know about operating in darkness is about to be challenged. Over the next 7 days, we're going to simulate conditions that your previous training never addressed. You're going to learn how to succeed when your primary senses can't be trusted." The lead operator, Master Sergeant William Taylor, stepped forward slightly. "Ma'am, with respect, we've all completed advanced night operations training. We're familiar with low-light scenarios." Morgan smiled, not with condescension, but with the understanding of someone who had once shared that confidence. "Master Sergeant, How many of your training scenarios involved complete power failure, active countermeasures against night vision technology, and navigation without visual references? Taylor's expression shifted slightly. None that included all three simultaneously. This mission includes all 3+ factors that intelligence hasn't identified yet. Your previous training prepared you to execute operations with technological support under predictable conditions. I'm here to prepare you for technological failure under unpredictable conditions. Over the following days, Morgan subjected the team to training scenarios that pushed them beyond anything they'd experienced. She created situations where their equipment malfunctioned, where their standard procedures failed, where success required sensory adaptation and improvisation rather than reliance on technology. Your tendency, she told them after a particularly challenging simulation, is to default to visual confirmation. But in this environment, your eyes become your least reliable sense. You need to learn how to operate when you can't see what you're doing. The operators initially struggled with her approach. They were accustomed to training that emphasized technological solutions to operational challenges. Morgan's methods deliberately removed those solutions, forcing them to develop capabilities they hadn't realized they possessed. "Ma'am," said Staff Sergeant Eric Robinson after a simulation where all visual references had been eliminated, "this is the 4th scenario today where we've had to navigate by sound and touch alone. Is the actual environment really going to be this challenging?" Morgan looked at the experienced operator with the steady gaze of someone who had learned these lessons through actual operations rather than simulations. "Staff Sergeant, in my experience, actual conditions are always more challenging than training scenarios. The question isn't whether your equipment will function as expected. It's whether you can complete the mission when it doesn't." By the 7th day, something had shifted in the team's approach. They still moved with precision, but they'd developed the kind of sensory awareness that allowed them to function effectively when visual confirmation wasn't possible. They'd learned to perceive obstacles before encountering them, to communicate without visual signals, to navigate by feel and sound when sight wasn't an option. "Time," Morgan called, ending their final training scenario. The operators had just completed a simulation that included every complication she could anticipate, and several she'd introduced without warning. Master Sergeant Taylor approached her, his expression thoughtful. "Ma'am, I need to admit something. When we started this training, some of us questioned whether a civilian consultant could teach Delta operators anything we didn't already know. And now?" "And now?" Morgan prompted. "Now we understand that the difference between standard training and specialized expertise isn't just what you know. It's how you operate when what you know isn't enough." Morgan nodded, feeling the satisfaction that came from successfully transferring knowledge that had been earned through selection processes most people couldn't complete. "Master Sergeant, you and your team are ready for this mission, not because you won't face unexpected challenges, but because you've learned how to overcome them without relying on technology that might fail you." The following morning, as the team prepared for deployment, General Hayes approached Morgan in the facility's briefing room. "Ms. Reeves, I've observed special operations training for over 2 decades. What you accomplished with this team in 7 days was exceptional. They're operating at a level one wouldn't have believed possible in such a compressed time frame." "They were already elite operators, General. I just helped them understand that elite isn't always enough. Sometimes you need to develop capabilities beyond standard parameters. The mission launches in 12 hours. Any final thoughts?" Morgan looked through the window at the team conducting their final equipment checks. 6 operators who had learned to think differently about their senses, about adaptation, about functioning in environments where technology provided no advantages. "They're ready," she said simply. "Whatever challenges they encounter, they're as prepared as humanly possible." As she watched the team board their transport aircraft, Morgan felt the familiar mixture of pride and concern that came with sending people into dangerous situations. She had given them everything she could, knowledge earned through her own specialized training, wisdom purchased with her own sacrifices. Now it was up to them to prove that specialists could adapt beyond their technology, beyond their training, beyond their expectations. 20 hours after the team's deployment, Morgan sat in JSOC's Secure Operations Center, monitoring encrypted communications and specialized sensor data that would determine whether her intensive training had been sufficient. The mission was progressing according to timeline, But she'd learned long ago that timelines were merely guidelines when operating in unpredictable environments. "Nighthawk team, this is Control," came the voice through secure communications. "Primary entry point is compromised. Infrared shows active security measures not identified in intelligence briefs." Morgan leaned forward slightly, recognizing the critical moment when her specialized training would truly be tested. This was exactly the kind of complication she had prepared them for, the point where standard approaches became inadequate and adaptation became essential. "Copy Control, Nighthawk proceeding to alternate infiltration vector. Switching to zero-tech protocol." Master Sergeant Taylor's voice carried controlled confidence rather than anxiety. Morgan felt a surge of professional satisfaction hearing that response. It meant the team understood that complications weren't mission killers, but simply problems requiring non-standard solutions. For the next 6 hours, she monitored as the operators navigated challenges that would have overwhelmed less prepared personnel. They encountered security systems where intelligence had predicted none, found the facility's power systems more thoroughly compromised than expected, and had to extract high-value assets through sectors where even backup lighting had failed completely. But they adapted. They navigated by touch and sound when visual confirmation was impossible. They communicated through prearranged signals when standard communications risked detection. They succeeded where conventional training would have faltered. "Control, this is Nighthawk. All assets secured. Extraction proceeding on modified timeline. 0 casualties." The operations center maintained professional composure, but the atmosphere shifted noticeably. The quiet satisfaction of specialized professionals witnessing exceptional execution under extreme conditions. Morgan released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her knowledge had contributed to bringing 6 operators and their extracted assets home safely from an environment where standard night operations training would have proven insufficient. General Hayes approached her station. "Miss Reeves, preliminary reports indicate that your specialized training methods made the critical difference." The team's ability to function in complete darkness was the determining factor in mission success. "They were exceptional before I met them, General. I just helped them adapt their skills to unfamiliar conditions." 4 weeks later, Morgan found herself back at Camp Lejeune, standing in her training facility and looking at a new group of Marines who had been specifically selected for her advanced program. Word of her role in the successful JSOC operation had spread through classified channels, bringing her a level of professional respect that made her both proud and slightly uncomfortable. "Before we begin," she told her new students, "I want to establish something clearly. I'm not here to tell you stories about classified operations or to impress you with credentials. I'm here to teach you how to operate effectively when standard training reaches its limits." One of the Marines raised his hand. "Ma'am, is it true that you prepared the team that completed the extraction mission that's been making waves in special operations circles?" Morgan considered how to answer. For 3 years, she'd hidden from recognition, avoided acknowledgement of her specialized capabilities. But she'd learned that some knowledge was too valuable to keep hidden, some expertise too important to minimize. "I had the privilege of helping prepare exceptional operators for challenging conditions," she said carefully. "But their success belonged to them. My role was simply to ensure they were ready for complications that standard training doesn't address." After class, she found a message waiting in her secure communications terminal. Not official correspondence, but a personal note from Master Sergeant Taylor. "Ms. Reeves wanted you to know that every member of Nighthawk team completed the mission because of what you taught us. We learned that being an operator isn't just about executing procedures. It's about adapting, thinking beyond our technology, and functioning effectively when conditions deteriorate beyond standard parameters. Thank you for teaching us capabilities we didn't know we could develop." Morgan read the message twice, then carefully secured it in her classified files, not because she needed validation of her worth, but because it represented something more significant than personal achievement. Evidence that specialized knowledge, properly transferred, could multiply exponentially. That evening, she walked past the advanced tactical range where her identity had been revealed. 6 months ago, the same targets stood at the same distances, but everything else had changed. She was no longer the invisible supply officer trying to avoid recognition. She was an instructor, a specialist, a bridge between standard training and the specialized capabilities needed for the most challenging operations. Her phone buzzed with a text from Vasquez. "Heard about the JSOC mission, proud of you. Proud of them, she replied. I just helped them discover capabilities they already possessed. That's what exceptional instructors do. They help people develop potential they didn't know they had. Morgan smiled, understanding finally that her story wasn't about redemption or recognition. It was about purpose. The recognition that some specialized knowledge was too valuable to waste. Some capabilities too important to leave undeveloped. She thought about the small scar on her forearm, the program Artemis identifier that had once felt like evidence of a classified past. Now it felt like documentation of a foundation. The specialized selection and training that had prepared her not just to be an operator, but to teach others how to function beyond the limits of their standard training. The supply depot still occasionally requested her assistance with complex inventory issues. JSOC would undoubtedly seek her consultation on future specialized operations, and Camp Lejeune's selected Marines would continue developing advanced capabilities under her guidance. But the real achievement wasn't in any of those individual activities. The real achievement was an understanding that specialists weren't defined by what they had accomplished in the past, but by what they continued to contribute in the present. Morgan Reeves had spent 3 years learning how to be invisible. Now she was spending her time learning how to be effective again, teaching one specialized team at a time, preparing one unit after another, sharing capabilities that could mean the difference between success and failure in situations where standard approaches weren't sufficient. Phantom had become something more valuable than a legendary operator. She'd become an exceptional instructor, passing on specialized knowledge earned through selection processes that most people couldn't complete to operators who might face similar challenges in environments where conventional training reached its limits. Some stories ended with recognition and redemption. This one ended with purpose and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that her expertise would continue serving critical missions, one specialized team at a time, for as long as she was capable of teaching. The small scar on her forearm had become not a reminder of what she'd lost, but documentation of what she'd learned, and what she was still learning to share with others who needed it most. In the end, that was enough. More than enough. 6 months after the successful JSOC mission, Morgan found herself in a situation she'd never anticipated, standing in the office of the Commanding General of Marine Corps Special Operations Command, facing an opportunity that would fundamentally change her relationship with the specialized community she'd reluctantly rejoined. Ms. Reeves, General Michael Collins began, over the past year, your training program has transformed our specialized capabilities in ways that conventional instruction never achieved. I'm authorized to offer you directorship of a new program, the Advanced Environmental Operations Division. Morgan maintained her composure, but the offer caught her by surprise. What would this division encompass, General? Specialized training for operations in environments where standard approaches and technology reach their limits, zero-light conditions, sensory-deprived settings, technological denial zones. Essentially institutionalizing the capabilities you've been developing in your current program, but on a much larger scale. This wasn't just another training position. This was the opportunity to create a formal program that would systematically develop the specialized capabilities she'd been teaching on a limited basis, to transform her individual expertise into institutional knowledge.
The program would draw candidates from across special operations communities, General Collins continued. Your curriculum would become standard protocol for specialized teams operating in challenging environments. Your methods would be documented and preserved for future generations of operators. Morgan considered the implications carefully. For years, she had operated in the shadows, first as Phantom, then as an anonymous supply officer, and most recently as a specialized instructor with limited scope. This position would bring her fully into the light, acknowledged, recognized, and empowered to shape military capabilities at an institutional level. May I ask why now? She inquired. General Collins' expression became more serious. The strategic landscape is evolving rapidly, Ms. Reeves. Our adversaries are developing capabilities specifically designed to neutralize our technological advantages. We're increasingly facing situations where our operators must function effectively when technology fails. The specialized skills you've been teaching, the ability to operate in zero-light conditions, to navigate by non-visual senses, to adapt when standard procedures aren't viable. These aren't just valuable anymore. They're becoming essential. Morgan nodded, understanding the strategic implications. The military had spent decades developing technological solutions to operational challenges. But technology had limitations, vulnerabilities that skilled adversaries were learning to exploit. The future would require operators who could function effectively when those technological advantages were compromised. There's something else you should know, General Collins added. This position would include formal recognition of your previous service with Program Artemis. Your record would be appropriately updated to reflect your contributions, with all the professional and personal considerations that entails. The offer represented everything Morgan had avoided for years: visibility, recognition, acknowledgement of her specialized background. But it also represented the opportunity to transform her individual expertise into something much more significant: institutional knowledge that would prepare countless operators for challenges they would otherwise face unprepared. "I'll need time to consider this," she said. "Of course, but not too much time, Ms. Reeves. The capabilities you've developed are needed now more than ever." That evening, Morgan sat in her apartment, weighing the most significant professional decision she'd faced since accepting her initial position as a specialized instructor. Her phone rang. Vasquez, with her uncanny ability to know when Morgan was at a crossroads. "So," Vasquez said without preamble, "heard about the MARSOC offer. General Collins doesn't extend those kinds of opportunities lightly. How do you always know these things before I've even processed them?" Morgan asked, not really expecting an answer. "The real question is what you're going to do about it," Vasquez replied. "This isn't just another training position. This is the chance to transform how we prepare operators for the most challenging environments they'll face." Morgan walked to her window, looking out at the base where she'd spent years hiding her specialized capabilities, then months selectively sharing them, and now faced the prospect of systematically developing them across entire special operations communities. "It would mean stepping completely out of the shadows," Morgan said quietly. "No more anonymity. No more operating below the radar." "True," Vasquez acknowledged. "But it would also mean that your expertise wouldn't disappear when you eventually retire. It would become part of how we train, how we operate, how we prepare for environments where standard approaches fail." The observation struck Morgan with unexpected force. She'd spent years thinking about her specialized knowledge as something personal, something that belonged to her alone. She hadn't considered it as something that could, perhaps should, outlive her individual career. "The Marines and operators you've trained," Vasquez continued, "they're exceptional because of what you've taught them. But what about the ones you'll never have time to train personally? Don't they deserve the same advantages, the same capabilities, the same chance to succeed when conditions deteriorate beyond standard parameters?" Morgan thought about the small scar on her forearm, the Program Artemis identifier that had marked her as someone with capabilities beyond standard training. That program had been highly selective, limited to a handful of operators who demonstrated exceptional potential. The proposed division would systematically develop similar capabilities across entire special operations communities. "You know what truly separates exceptional specialists from everyone else?" Quote, Morgan asked. "Tell me." "It's not physical attributes or even natural talent. It's adaptability, the ability to function effectively when conditions deteriorate beyond what training has prepared you for. It's what I learned in Program Artemis, what I tried to teach at the supply depot, what I've been developing more formally in my current position." "And now you have the chance to institutionalize that adaptability," Vasquez said, "to make it part of how we systematically prepare operators for the most challenging environments they'll face." Morgan looked at her reflection in the window, seeing not the invisible supply officer she'd once tried to be, not even the specialized instructor she'd become, but the potential architect of capabilities that would extend far beyond her individual contribution. The next morning, she walked into General Collins's office with the calm confidence that had characterized her entire specialized career. "I'll accept the position," she said without preamble, "but I have conditions." "I expected nothing less," General Collins replied. "Name them." "The division remains focused on practical capabilities, not theoretical frameworks. We select candidates based on adaptability, not just technical proficiency. We maintain direct feedback loops with operational teams to ensure our training addresses actual challenges rather than hypothetical scenarios." General Collins nodded. "All reasonable and appropriate." "Anything else?" Morgan paused, then added the condition that mattered most to her. "Program Artemis is formally acknowledged in the division's foundational documents. Not for my personal recognition, but because the principles developed there deserve to be preserved and expanded upon." Agreed, General Collins said without hesitation. When can you begin developing the organizational framework? I already have, Morgan replied, placing a detailed proposal on his desk. These are the initial parameters for candidate selection, curriculum development, and operational integration. I've been refining this framework since my first day as an instructor. General Collins reviewed the document with growing appreciation. You've been planning for this possibility all along, haven't you? Not this specific opportunity, Morgan clarified. But I've always recognized that specialized knowledge is only valuable when it's effectively transferred to those who need it most. 3 months later, Morgan stood in the newly established training facility of the Advanced Environmental Operations Division. The space reflected her specialized philosophy: adaptable configurations, variable environmental controls, and equipment designed to develop capabilities beyond technological dependence. Around her, the first cohort of selected candidates prepared for initial assessment, 24 operators representing every special operations community in the military. They had been chosen not just for their technical proficiency, but for their demonstrated adaptability under challenging conditions. Before we begin, Morgan addressed the group, I want to establish the fundamental principle of this division. We are not here to teach you to rely on advanced technology. We are here to develop your capabilities to function effectively when that technology fails. The most sophisticated equipment in the world becomes useless in certain environments. Your senses, your adaptability, your ability to operate beyond standard parameters. These are the capabilities that will determine mission success when conditions deteriorate beyond conventional training. She looked at the assembled specialists, recognizing in each of them the potential she had once developed in herself, then hidden for years, then selectively shared, and now would systematically cultivate across entire operational communities. Some of you might be wondering why you were selected for this program, she continued. It wasn't your technical scores or your operational records, though those were considered. You were selected because you demonstrated something more valuable, the capacity to adapt when standard approaches failed. That adaptability is what we'll be developing here, systematically and comprehensively. At the back of the training facility, Morgan noticed General Collins observing quietly with several senior officers from JSOC, MARSOC, and other specialized commands. Their presence underscored the strategic importance now placed on the capabilities she'd been developing since her return from anonymity. Today, we begin developing capabilities that will fundamentally transform how you operate in challenging environments, Morgan continued. Not by giving you more advanced technology, but by teaching you to function effectively when that technology is compromised or unavailable.
The skills you develop here will serve not just your individual careers, but the entire special operations community for generations to come. As the assessment began, Morgan moved through the facility, observing candidates with the practiced eye of someone who had once been in their position. She noticed their strengths, identified their limitations, recognized their potential for development beyond conventional parameters. Later that evening, as she reviewed the initial assessment data in her office, she found Vasquez waiting for her with 2 cups of coffee. So, Director Reeves, Vasquez said with a smile, how does it feel to step completely out of the shadows? Morgan considered the question thoughtfully. Different than I expected, less about personal recognition, more about institutional impact. That's what truly exceptional specialists eventually discover, Vasquez observed. Individual capabilities matter, but systematically developing those capabilities in others creates something far more significant. Morgan nodded, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. From the classified operations of Program Artemis, to the anonymous routine of the supply depot, to the specialized instruction that had gradually revealed her true capabilities, and now to the institutional development of those capabilities across entire operational communities. You know what I realized today? Morgan said. The small scar on my arm, the Program Artemis identifier, it was never just about marking me as someone with specialized training. It was documentation of an approach to operations that deserved to be preserved and expanded. Not for recognition or status, but because that approach saves lives when conditions deteriorate beyond conventional parameters. Vasquez smiled. And now, that approach will become standard protocol rather than specialized exception. Morgan looked through her office window at the training facility, where 24 candidates were beginning a journey that would transform not just their individual capabilities, but eventually the operational parameters of entire special operations communities. The quiet supply officer, who had once perfected the art of being invisible, had become the architect of capabilities that would be visible throughout the military's most specialized units. Phantom had emerged from the shadows not just as an individual operator with exceptional skills, but as the developer of systematic approaches to the most challenging operational environments. Some stories ended with the protagonist returning to comfortable anonymity. This one ended with Morgan Reeves embracing her true potential, not just as a specialist with extraordinary capabilities, but as the developer of those capabilities in others who would face challenges she might never encounter personally. The small scar on her forearm had become not just documentation of her past, but the foundation of a future where the capabilities she had developed would continue serving critical missions long after her individual contribution had ended. In the end, that wasn't just enough. It was everything. 2 years after founding the Advanced Environmental Operations Division, Morgan Reeves stood in the observation room overlooking the culmination exercise for her 4th cohort of specialists. Through specialized glass, she watched as 20 operators navigated a complex facility in manufactured conditions that eliminated all visual references. They moved with a confidence and precision that would have seemed impossible to conventional observers, communicating without speaking, navigating without seeing, functioning effectively in an environment where standard training would have rendered most operators completely ineffective. "Remarkable," said Admiral Jonathan Hayes, the newly appointed Director of Joint Special Operations Command. "When I was briefed about this program, I honestly thought the capabilities were being exaggerated. I've never seen operators function this effectively in zero-light conditions." Morgan maintained her professional demeanor but felt quiet satisfaction in the Admiral's assessment. "This is actually a standard outcome for our program now, Admiral. Every cohort achieves similar capabilities by the culmination phase." "And how many of them could perform at this level before entering your program?" Admiral Hayes asked. "None," Morgan replied simply. "These are exceptional operators with distinguished service records, but specialized environmental adaptation isn't something conventional training addresses effectively. That's the gap our division was created to fill." Admiral Hayes studied her with newfound respect. "When General Collins proposed expanding your program across all special operations communities, there was significant skepticism at the highest levels. Budget constraints, competing priorities, the usual institutional resistance to innovation. But seeing these results, it's difficult to argue with demonstrated capabilities." Morgan nodded, having anticipated this conversation. "The real value becomes apparent when these specialists return to their operational units, Admiral. They not only apply these capabilities themselves, but elevate the performance of their entire teams in challenging environments." The observation room door opened, and Lieutenant General Patricia Winters, the Deputy Commander of Special Operations Command, entered quietly. Morgan had been informed that General Winters might observe the culmination exercise, but her presence still carried significant weight. As one of the highest-ranking women in special operations history, Winters represented a leadership path that few had successfully navigated. "Director Reeves," General Winters acknowledged with professional courtesy, "Admiral Hayes has been quite impressed with your program's outcomes." "As am I." "Thank you, General," Morgan replied. "We're focused on addressing capability gaps that conventional training doesn't adequately cover." General Winters moved closer to the observation window, watching the operators execute a particularly complex extraction sequence in complete darkness. "When was this division established? 2 years ago?" "Yes, General. We've graduated 3 cohorts so far, with the 4th completing their training this week." "And the operational impact?" Morgan had prepared thoroughly for this question. "Our graduates have participated in 37 specialized operations, where environmental factors compromised standard approaches. All 37 completed successfully, with several mission commanders specifically citing environmental adaptation capabilities as the critical difference." Admiral Hayes whistled softly. "That's an exceptional record, especially considering the types of operations these teams typically undertake." "Indeed," General Winters agreed, turning from the window to face Morgan directly. "Which brings me to the reason for my visit today. The Secretary has authorized expansion of your program to include international special operations partners. Initially the Five Eyes community, potentially broader depending on results and security considerations." The proposal caught Morgan by surprise, though she maintained her composed exterior. International expansion would transform her specialized division from a national asset to a multinational capability developer, an elevation with profound strategic implications. That represents a significant evolution in the program's scope, General, Morgan observed carefully. It does, General Winters acknowledged. And it comes with corresponding changes in leadership structure and institutional positioning. The Secretary is proposing establishment of the Joint Environmental Operations Center, with expanded facilities, increased personnel allocation, and direct reporting lines to JSOC and SOCOM leadership. And the leadership structure? Morgan asked, already suspecting the answer. We're recommending you for appointment as the center's first director, with promotion to the equivalent of brigadier general in terms of operational authority, General Winters stated without preamble. Your formal title would be executive director, maintaining civilian status but with commensurate military authority within the special operations community. Morgan absorbed this information with the same measured calm that had characterized her specialized career. 2 years ago, she had been hesitant to accept leadership of a training division. Now she was being offered command of what would effectively become an international center of excellence for specialized environmental operations. The selection process for the international cohorts would remain under your authority, Admiral Hayes added. The Secretary is quite insistent on maintaining the standards and methodologies you've established. When does the Secretary need my decision? Morgan asked. The international framework is being finalized next month, General Winters replied. We'd need your acceptance before those discussions conclude. After the senior officers departed, Morgan remained in the observation room, watching her current cohort complete their culmination exercise with exceptional proficiency. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From classified operator to anonymous supply officer, to specialized instructor to division director, and now potentially to a position of international influence. Her phone buzzed with a text from Vasquez, who had recently been appointed Command Sergeant Major for Marine Special Operations Command. Heard Winters and Hayes paid you a visit. Big things happening? Potentially, Morgan replied. How do you always know these things before they're official? The better question is what you're going to do about it, came Vasquez's typical direct response. That evening, Morgan sat in her office, reviewing the operational data from units that had integrated her program's graduates. The statistics told a compelling story. Increased mission success rates, reduced casualties, and enhanced capability in environments where conventional approaches proved insufficient. But statistics told only part of the story. The real impact was revealed in the after-action reports she received from operational commanders. Detailed assessments of how environmental adaptation capabilities had transformed mission outcomes in situations where standard training would have proven inadequate. Target facility experienced complete power failure during extraction phase, one report noted. Teams switched seamlessly to zero-light protocols, maintained spatial orientation without visual references, and completed primary objective with zero casualties. Environmental adaptation training directly enabled mission success under conditions that would have compromised conventional operations. Another report was even more explicit. Hostile electronic countermeasures disabled all night vision capabilities during infiltration. Graduate of Advanced Environmental Operations Division immediately implemented alternative sensory navigation techniques, guided team through critical approach phase without technological assistance, and established secure position despite complete visual compromise. Requesting priority allocation for 3 additional team members to attend specialized environmental training. As Morgan reviewed these operational validations, she found herself thinking about the small scar on her forearm, the program Artemis identifier that had once marked her as someone with unique capabilities. When that program was disbanded, those specialized skills might have disappeared entirely if she had remained hidden in the supply depot. Instead, they had been systematically developed, institutionalized, and now stood on the verge of international expansion. Her secure terminal chimed with an incoming message. Colonel James Blackwood, her former colleague, who had recently been appointed to JSOC's Strategic Planning Division. Morgan heard about the Secretary's proposal. This isn't just another promotion. This is transformation of what you've built from a specialized program to an international strategic capability. The implications extend far beyond individual operations. She appreciated Blackwood's perspective. He had been the first to recognize her at the night range 3 years ago, the first to understand that her capabilities were too valuable to remain hidden in administrative anonymity. "The operational validation is compelling," she replied. "But international expansion introduces complexities beyond technical training. Cultural approaches to specialized operations vary significantly, even among close allies." "Which is precisely why you're the right person to navigate those complexities," Blackwood responded. "You've always understood that environmental adaptation is about mindset as much as technique. That applies to institutional environments as much as physical ones." The observation struck Morgan with unexpected clarity. Throughout her specialized career, she had adapted to challenging environments. The classified world of Program Artemis, the anonymous routine of the supply depot, the initial skepticism toward her training methods, the institutional resistance to innovative approaches. Each environment had required different adaptations, different strategies for effective operation. The proposed international center would present new environmental challenges, diplomatic considerations, multinational command structures, varied operational doctrines, but the fundamental principle remained consistent: adaptation to challenging conditions through specialized capabilities that conventional approaches couldn't provide. The next morning, Morgan walked into General Winter's office at Special Operations Command Headquarters with the same calm confidence that had characterized her entire career. "I'll accept the appointment," she said without extended preamble, "but I have specific parameters that need to be established from the outset." "I expected nothing less," General Winters replied with a hint of approval. "What are your requirements?" "Candidate selection remains under my direct authority regardless of national origin or sending unit. Training methodologies and assessment standards cannot be compromised for diplomatic considerations." Morgan thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, from the classified operations of Program Artemis to the anonymous routine of the supply depot to the mockery at the night range that had inadvertently revealed her true capabilities. "You know what I've learned through this process, General?" Morgan said. "The most valuable specialized capabilities aren't technological innovations or classified techniques. They're mindset shifts, the ability to adapt when conventional approaches fail, to function effectively when standard parameters are compromised, to navigate environments where others are effectively disabled." General Winters nodded. "And now that mindset will become multinational doctrine rather than specialized exception." The following morning, Morgan addressed the first international cohort in the center's primary briefing facility. The operators represented the elite of global special operations forces, British SAS, Canadian JTF-2, Australian SASR, and other units whose capabilities matched the most advanced American teams. "Before we begin your specialized training," Morgan began, "I want to establish the fundamental principle of this center. We are not here to teach you to rely on advanced technology or sophisticated equipment. We are here to develop your capabilities to function effectively when that technology fails, when that equipment is compromised, when the environments you face exceed the parameters of conventional training." She looked at the assembled specialists, recognizing in each of them the potential she had once developed in herself, then hidden for years, then selectively shared, and now would systematically cultivate across multinational special operations communities. "Some of you might be wondering why your units selected you for this program," she continued. "It wasn't just your technical proficiency or operational experience, though those were considered. You were selected because you demonstrated something more fundamental: the capacity to adapt when standard approaches failed. That adaptability is what we'll be developing here, systematically and comprehensively." At the back of the briefing room, Morgan noticed General Winters observing quietly with several senior officers from partner nations. Their presence underscored the strategic importance now placed on the capabilities that had once been limited to the most classified programs. "Today we begin developing capabilities that will fundamentally transform how you operate in challenging environments," Morgan continued. "Not by giving you more advanced technology, but by teaching you to function effectively when that technology is compromised or unavailable. The skills you develop here will serve not just your individual careers or national units, but the entire multinational special operations community for generations to come." As the briefing concluded and the operators moved to their initial assessment stations, Morgan found herself thinking about the small scar on her forearm, the Program Artemis identifier that had once marked her as someone with exceptional individual capabilities. That program had been highly selective, limited to the few who could complete one of the military's most challenging selection processes. The specialized knowledge developed there might have disappeared entirely when political considerations led to the program's disbandment. Instead, that knowledge had been preserved, systematized, expanded, and now stood on the verge of becoming multinational doctrine, capabilities that would be developed across special operations communities worldwide, preparing operators for environments where conventional training proved insufficient. The quiet supply officer who had once perfected the art of being invisible had become the architect of capabilities that would be visible throughout global special operations communities. Phantom had emerged from the shadows not just as an individual operator with extraordinary skills, but as the developer of systematic approaches to the most challenging operational environments. Some stories ended with the protagonist returning to comfortable anonymity after brief recognition. This one ended with Morgan Reeves embracing her greatest potential, not just as a specialist with remarkable capabilities, but as the developer of those capabilities across multinational forces who would face challenges she might never encounter personally. The small scar on her forearm had become not just documentation of her specialized past, but the foundation of a future where the capabilities she had developed would continue serving critical missions long after her individual contribution had ended. The specialized knowledge that had once been limited to Program Artemis, capabilities that politicians had tried to bury, that she had hidden in administrative anonymity, that had been accidentally revealed through an impossible shot in complete darkness, would now become institutional doctrine rather than exceptional exception. In that moment, standing at the threshold between her past as a specialized operator and her future as the developer of multinational capabilities, Morgan realized that her greatest contribution had never been the shots she took in darkness. It had been her willingness to step out of the shadows and ensure that specialized knowledge survived beyond individual careers, that capabilities developed through classified programs and exceptional selection processes became systematic approaches rather than lost expertise. The supply officer who had been mocked at the night range had transformed not just her own career trajectory, but the operational parameters of special operations forces worldwide. The impossible shot in complete darkness had been just the beginning. The revelation of capabilities that would eventually prepare countless operators for environments where conventional training reached its limits. In the end, that wasn't just personal redemption or professional recognition. It was the fulfillment of purpose that transcended individual achievement, the development of capabilities that would save lives, enable critical missions, and transform operational outcomes in the most challenging environments imaginable. The small scar on Morgan's forearm, once hidden beneath long sleeves to avoid revealing her specialized past, now represented not just what she had been, but what she had created. A multinational approach to operating effectively when conventional parameters failed and standard training proved insufficient. Some capabilities were too valuable to remain exceptional. Some knowledge was too important to be lost when programs disbanded. Some expertise was too critical to disappear when politics interfered with operational necessity. Morgan Reeves had ensured that the specialized capabilities of Program Artemis survived not just as classified exception, but as multinational doctrine. Preparation for environments where technology reached its limits and human adaptability determined mission outcomes. That transformation from individual capability to institutional knowledge wasn't just her legacy. It was her greatest operation, the development of specialized adaptability that would serve critical missions long after individual operators completed their service. In the specialized community, there was no higher achievement than capabilities that outlived their developers, expertise that became doctrine rather than exception. Morgan had achieved that transformation not through technical innovation, but through the systematic development of human potential beyond conventional parameters. The impossible shot in complete darkness had revealed what one specialist could accomplish. The Joint Environmental Operations Center would ensure that those capabilities became standard rather than exceptional. Systematic preparation for environments where conventional training proved insufficient. As she turned from the window and prepared to review the international assessment results, Morgan felt the quiet satisfaction of mission accomplishment, not the temporary achievement of individual operations, but the lasting impact of capabilities that would serve multinational forces for generations to come. Phantom had completed her most important mission, ensuring that specialized knowledge survived beyond individual careers and became institutional doctrine rather than exceptional capability. The quiet supply officer who had been mocked at the military range had transformed not just her own trajectory, but the operational parameters of special operations worldwide. In specialized communities, there was no greater contribution. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, You won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.